They told her she was just a confused old woman who'd wandered into the wrong place. They didn't know she was the very reason those billion-dollar jets could still fly. And her granddaughter was piloting one. The Arizona sun was already a hammer blow at 0800 hours, striking the vast tarmac of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base and sending shimmering waves of heat into the air. The scent of scorched asphalt, ozone, and distant jet fuel mingled with the cloying sweetness of popcorn from concession stands already doing a brisk trade. A river of humanity, families with excited children, active duty personnel in crisp uniforms, and aviation enthusiasts of every age, flowed toward the flight line for the annual Wings of Freedom air show. Weaving slowly but with unshakable purpose against this current was Margaret Sullivan. At 85, her steps were shorter, her frame more delicate, but her eyes, the color of a faded sky, missed nothing. She clutched a worn leather satchel to her chest, a vessel carrying the most precious cargo of her life, a collection of notebooks, their pages filled with 4 decades of secrets, solutions, and schematics. Her arthritic but sure knuckles were white against the weathered leather. To the boisterous crowd, the day was a festival of noise and power. The distant shriek of an F-16 tearing a seam in the sky was a cause for cheers. But for Margaret, it was a pilgrimage. She wasn't here for the spectacle, she was here for a single, stubborn aircraft, the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The Warthog. To most, it was an ugly, aging relic, a brutish beast from a bygone era. To Margaret, it was history. It was ingenuity born from desperation. It was the machine she had dedicated her youth to keeping alive, patching its wounds so it could fly back into the fight. She hadn't made it 20 yards past the main gate when a figure blocked her path. He was a man in his early 40s, wearing a staff vest stretched tight over a polo shirt. His gleaming name tag read Bradley Chin, event coordinator. His posture was a study in manufactured importance, and his eyes swept over Margaret's simple floral dress and comfortable walking shoes with a look of profound disinterest. "Sorry, ma'am. This area is for VIPs and authorized personnel only," he said, his voice smooth with a practiced, impersonal authority. He gestured vaguely with a clipboard toward a distant yellow rope line, 100 yards away, where the general public was packed like sardines. Margaret's voice was soft, but clear. "I understand, son. I'm not a VIP. I'm here for the A-10 maintenance demonstration. I have some relevant materials." She began to lift the flap of her satchel. Bradley Chin cut her off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a patient, condescending smirk one might use on a toddler. "That's wonderful that you're so enthusiastic," he said, his gaze flicking to his polished shoes and back. "But we can't have civilians wandering around the active prep zones. It's a matter of safety and procedure." Another staffer, a younger man named Derek with a headset askew on his head, sauntered over. He took in the scene, snorted softly, and leaned in toward Bradley. "Probably just someone's grandmother who wandered off from the family picnic area," he murmured, not quite quietly enough. They shared a brief, dismissive laugh. The words, though not shouted, landed like physical blows. They pushed Margaret back, not with hands, but with the sheer weight of their condescension. She was once again what she had fought her entire life not to be, an invisible old woman. She felt the years collapse, the decades of proving herself, of earning respect in greasy, male-dominated hangars, all of it erased by a single, smug glance. Without another word, she turned and began the slow walk toward the general viewing area. It was a shuffle of defeat. The press of sweaty bodies, the impersonal steel of the barrier cold against her chest as she finally found a sliver of space, the sun beating down without pity, it was all a physical manifestation of her exclusion. The maintenance demo, the very reason she'd made this journey, was a blur of activity across a field of heat-hazed concrete. She could see nothing. Defeated, she opened her satchel and pulled out one of the old notebooks. The pages were brittle, the corners soft with age, but inside, the ink was still sharp. She stared at a complex schematic of a hydraulic actuator bypass, her own invention, annotated in a script that defied the tremor of age. Here, in her hands, was the secret that kept a fleet flying. Out there, beyond the barrier, she was just a nobody. The air in the general viewing section was thick with the smell of sunscreen and fried onions. The relentless narration from the event loudspeakers was a garish soundtrack to Margaret's quiet disappointment. She traced the lines of her drawing, the world around her fading into a dull roar. The graphite and the ink were a language she understood better than any other. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was young, respectful, and tinged with professional curiosity. Margaret looked up to see a young woman in a tan flight suit, the name, Martinez, stitched over her right breast pocket. Her hands were clean, but there were faint grease stains permanently etched into the creases of her knuckles. A maintainer. Staff Sergeant Rosa Martinez was staring in frustration at a diagnostic flowchart on her military-grade tablet. It depicted the official, by-the-book procedure for troubleshooting a recurring pressure drop in an F-35's electrohydrostatic system, a problem her team had been battling for weeks. The manual solution was a costly, time-consuming full-system replacement. She knew, with the gut instinct of a good mechanic, that there had to be a better way. Then she saw the notebook in the old woman's hands. It wasn't a souvenir program. It was a workbook, filled with impossibly detailed, hand-drawn schematics. "Are you an engineer?" Martinez asked, leaning in slightly, her eyes fixed on the open page. For the first time that day, Margaret felt a flicker of recognition. She offered a small, weary smile. "I was a crew chief, a long time ago. Specialized in battle damage repair on the A-10. Martinez's eyes widened. Battle damage repair wasn't about following a manual, it was about improvisation, genius, and keeping pilots alive when the book had no answers. The Warthog? No way. They're legends. The things they say you old-timers could do with duct tape and sheer nerve." Margaret's smile gained a little more warmth. She pointed a trembling finger at a specific annotation on her diagram. "The official manual calls for a full system flush and diagnostic if this actuator fails. That's a 6-hour job on a good day. But in the field, you don't have 6 hours. If you isolate the secondary reservoir here," she traced a new line with her fingernail, "and create a temporary bypass loop with a standard-issue hydraulic line, you can find the microfracture in 20 minutes. It keeps the system operational long enough to get home." Martinez stared, her mouth slightly agape. It was elegant, brilliant, and completely outside of any procedure she had ever been taught. It was the kind of institutional knowledge that was vanishing, replaced by digital flowcharts that left no room for ingenuity. That should be in the official TOS, she whispered, in awe. Before Margaret could reply, a man standing nearby, his face a roadmap of desert sun and old worries, shifted his weight. He wore a faded, Desert Storm veteran cap pulled low. He'd been half listening, a wry smile on his face at the sight of a young airman getting a lesson from a civilian. "Lady," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "every A-10 maintainer from my generation knows the Sullivan Manual. Wasn't a real book. It was a collection of photocopied pages, passed down from crew chief to crew chief like scripture. Full of tricks just like that one. Whoever that Sullivan was, she saved more birds than any 10 pilots." He was talking about her, a legend he thought was anonymous, a ghost in the machine. He spoke the name with a reverence reserved for heroes. Then, he truly looked at her. He saw the name embroidered on the corner of her satchel, barely visible, M. Sullivan. He saw the notebook in her hands, the source code of the legend itself. His eyes, which had seen the sands of Iraq and the skies over Kuwait, widened in disbelief. The wry smile vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated awe. He took a half-step back, as if in the presence of royalty. His voice dropped to a rasp, thick with emotion. "Oh my God," he breathed. "M. Sullivan. Margaret Sullivan. You're her." The Desert Storm veteran's question hung in the hot, still air, a bubble of silence in the noisy crowd. Martinez's head snapped between the veteran and Margaret, comprehension dawning on her face. Margaret simply gave a small, almost shy nod. "That was a long time ago," she repeated softly. "I just wanted to make sure the kids got home safe." The veteran's name was Master Sergeant retired Bill Jensen, and for a moment, he was speechless. Then, he straightened up, his posture shifting from that of a civilian spectator to a soldier standing before a superior officer. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It is an honor. A profound honor." He turned to his friend, another veteran in a similar cap. "Frank, you see who this is? This is Margaret Sullivan." "The Sullivan." Frank's jaw dropped. "No kidding. The Sullivan Manual Sullivan. I was a crew chief at Al Jaber in '98. Her procedure for patching a fuel line with sealant and a soda can save my hide, and my pilots." Word began to spread. It started as a ripple, a whispered, "That's her," passed from one veteran to another. An Air Force E-7 standing nearby overheard and walked over, his expression skeptical until he saw the notebook. He looked at Margaret, then back at the A-10 making a wide turn in the distance. The connection clicked. He simply removed the patch from his flight suit's shoulder, the insignia of the 354th Fighter Squadron, and held it out to her. "My father flew with the 354th in Vietnam, ma'am. He told me stories. He said his crew chief was a wizard. He said her name was Sullivan." The ripple was becoming a wave. More veterans, drawn by the shift in energy, began to gather. They formed a loose, protective semicircle around Margaret, their bodies instinctively creating a barrier between her and the jostling crowd. An impromptu honor guard. The stories started to flow, a river of gratitude held back for decades. "Your emergency rudder repair guide. Got my pilot through a thunderstorm over Bosnia. That trick with the landing gear. I teach it to my rookies today. I just never knew who came up with it." One by one, they came forward. They didn't ask for autographs or photos. They offered something far more meaningful. A handshake. A quiet, "Thank you." Some pressed challenge coins into her palm, the heavy, metallic totems of military brotherhood. She was no longer an invisible old woman, she was a living monument, the architect of their survival. Meanwhile, in the VIP tent, Bradley Chin saw the commotion on a security monitor. His perfectly ordered event was being disrupted. All he saw was a small, disorderly mob forming in Section C, centered on the same old woman he had dismissed earlier. His authority felt challenged. He keyed the mic on his radio, his voice dripping with annoyance. "Security, this is Chin. We have a potential disturbance in Section C, repeat, Section C. Some old woman is causing a scene, drawing a crowd. I want you to go down there and disperse them. Handle it discreetly." Two young Air Force security personnel, no older than 20, received the call. They started making their way through the crowd, their expressions firm with purpose. But as they got closer, they saw it wasn't a disturbance. It wasn't a protest. The people weren't angry, their faces were filled with reverence. They saw decorated veterans, men and women with decades of service etched onto their faces, quietly lining up to thank an elderly woman as if she were a 4-star general. The young airmen slowed, their hands dropping from their belts, their faces a mask of confusion. The orders in their ears made no sense in the reality before their eyes. At that same moment, a static-laced message crackled over a secondary channel in the cockpit of an A-10, call sign, Warthog 7-1. A friend on the ground crew was relaying the chatter from Section C. "Sarah, you are not gonna believe this. There's some kind of commotion down here. They're saying your grandmother, Margaret Sullivan, is in the crowd." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Morrison felt the words punch the air from her lungs. Her grandmother? Here. In the general admission crowd? The fight they'd had months ago, a stupid argument about Sarah taking on too many risks, about Margaret feeling left behind, flashed in her mind, sharp and painful. Pride and distance had kept them apart. Now, her grandmother was down there, being treated like a nuisance. A fire, hot and pure, burned through the guilt. Her gloved thumb hovered over the transmit button on her control stick. Breaking formation during a demonstration for a non-emergency reason was a cardinal sin. It was a direct violation of a dozen regulations. It could get her grounded, officially reprimanded, a black mark on a stellar career. And it was the most right thing she had ever done. "Tower, this is Warthog 7-1, she said, her voice steady and clear, betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I am breaking from the demonstration pattern. I have a personal matter of extreme honor to attend to." The air traffic controller's voice crackled back, laced with confusion. "Warthog 7-1, say again. You are to maintain pattern. Acknowledge." "Negative, Tower. Warthog 7-1 is deviating. Transmitting on the public address frequency." Before the controller could protest further, Sarah flipped a switch. Her voice, the voice of a combat-proven pilot, was suddenly booming from every speaker across the air base. In the VIP tent, Bradley Chin's face was plastered on the Jumbotron, his smarmy smile on full display as he explained the A-10's next maneuver to a local news reporter. He heard his own presentation interrupted by Sarah's voice and his smile froze. "Good afternoon, everyone," Sarah's voice echoed, powerful and clear. For those of you in Section C, you may have noticed a gathering around an 85-year-old woman named Margaret Sullivan. On the Jumbotron, Bradley's face melted from confusion to a mask of dawning horror. He looked like a man who had just realized the unexploded ordnance he'd been kicking was live. Down in the crowd, Margaret looked up, her hand flying to her mouth. The familiar, brutish shape of the A-10 had peeled away from its flight path and was now banking steeply, heading directly toward them. Toward her. "I've heard some people today dismiss old techniques as Stone Age procedures," Sarah's voice continued, each word a perfectly aimed 30mm cannon shell. "Well, I'm here to tell you that this Stone Age engineering is the only reason I, and hundreds of pilots like me, get to fly home to our families. The woman you are looking at is Chief Master Sergeant Margaret Sullivan, retired. She is a living legend. And she is my grandmother." The A-10 roared low over Section C, a deafening, glorious tribute. Sarah dipped her left wing, then her right, a pilot's salute of profound respect. She pulled back on the stick, climbing steeply into the sky, executing a maneuver not on any air show schedule, a perfect, solitary version of the missing man formation. A tribute usually reserved for the fallen, but today, it was for a hero who was very much alive. A stunned silence fell over the crowd for a single heartbeat. It was broken by a single, guttural, "Hooyah," from Master Sergeant retired Bill Jensen. Then, the entire air base erupted. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of emotion that drowned out even the sound of the jet engines. On the Jumbotron, Bradley Chin's face was ashen. Every smug, condescending word he'd spoken that day was replaying in his mind, now framed by the public, thunderous validation from the sky. He was no longer an event coordinator. He was a fool, broadcast on a 50-foot screen for all to see. The shockwave from Sarah's tribute was still echoing across the base when a new figure began moving with quiet purpose from the VIP grandstand. He was a man in his late 50s, his flight suit immaculate, 2 silver stars gleaming on each collar. This was Major General Evans, the base commander. He didn't run. He walked with an unnerving calm that spoke of absolute authority. The 2 young security airmen, who were still standing frozen near Margaret, saw him coming and snapped to attention, their confusion replaced by dread. General Evans ignored them for a moment. His eyes were on Margaret, and the crowd of veterans surrounding her. He took in the scene, the challenge coins in her hand, the tear tracks on her cheeks, the fierce pride on the faces of the old soldiers. He understood instantly. He walked straight up to the flustered security guards. "Stand down," he said, his voice low but carrying the authority of his rank. "And form an honor guard for this lady. Now." The airmen didn't hesitate. They turned, faced Margaret, and rendered a salute as sharp as a rifle crack. The general then turned his gaze on Bradley Chin, who was scurrying over from the VIP tent, his face a mess of flop sweat and panic. "General, sir, I can explain. It was a simple security protocol misunderstanding, General Evans held up a hand, silencing him. "Your job, Mr. Chin, was to coordinate an event celebrating the heritage and people of the United States Air Force. You have failed. Your more important, unwritten job was to show respect to every single person who walks onto this base. You have failed spectacularly." He looked from Bradley's pale face to Margaret's dignified one. He gently took a spare VIP pass from his aide. "I believe this belongs to you, ma'am." He then looked back at Bradley. "Pack your desk. You're done here." Without another word to the disgraced coordinator, the general turned back to Margaret. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea, a silent, respectful path forming from the steel barrier of general admission to the plush seating of the VIP section. It was a walk of redemption. When they arrived at the A-10 maintenance demonstration area, the crew on duty, who had watched the entire drama unfold, stood ramrod straight. The general gestured to the aircraft. "Chief Master Sergeant Sullivan," he said, his voice resonating with respect. "My crews follow procedures you wrote before they were born. Would you do us the honor of supervising the remainder of this demonstration?" For a moment, Margaret was overwhelmed. Then, the muscle memory of a lifetime took over. She straightened her shoulders. The frail, dismissed grandmother vanished, and the legendary crew chief returned. "It would be my privilege, General." What followed was not a demonstration. It was a masterclass. Margaret didn't need her notebooks. She walked the crew through each step, her voice clear and steady. She had them run a diagnostic on a simulated hydraulics leak, ignoring the tablet and telling them to use their ears. "Listen for the change in pitch from the pump," she instructed. "It will tell you more than any sensor." She ran a bare hand over a line of rivets on the wing, her gnarled fingers reading the metal for signs of stress. "You feel that? That slight vibration? That's the sign of a hairline fracture developing underneath. No computer can teach you that." Staff Sergeant Martinez, who had been invited inside the ropes by the general, followed Margaret's every move, her eyes wide, soaking in a lifetime of wisdom that couldn't be digitized or downloaded. The demonstration had been transformed from a piece of PR into a sacred passing of knowledge. Margaret Sullivan was finally back where she belonged. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the tarmac, the transformed demonstration concluded. The applause from the VIP section and the nearby crowds was thunderous and heartfelt. General Evans stepped forward and quietly asked Margaret if she would be willing to say a few words. Margaret hesitated, her eyes finding Sarah, who had landed and was now standing at the edge of the crowd, her helmet under her arm, her face beaming with pride. Sarah gave her a small, encouraging nod. She stepped to the microphone, her small frame dwarfed by the massive aircraft behind her. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried with absolute clarity. "When I first joined the Air Force, a long time ago," she began, "I was told that women didn't belong in aircraft maintenance. They said our hands were too weak, our minds too scattered for the complexities of mechanics." A wry smile touched her lips. "I didn't do this work to prove them wrong. I did it to bring people home. That's the only thing that ever really matters. Not whether they think you belong, but whether you make a difference." She looked out at the crowd, her gaze lingering on the young faces like Martinez's. "Prejudice is loud," she said, her voice gaining strength. "But competence has a quiet, enduring echo. Don't waste your energy fighting the noise. Just do the work. Build something that lasts. Build something that brings your people home. Your work will speak for itself, long after all the shouting is over." When she finished, the applause was deafening. Every uniformed member in sight, from the youngest airman to General Evans himself, rendered a slow, deliberate salute. Sarah rushed forward, and the hug between grandmother and granddaughter was 40 years in the making. All the hurt from their recent argument evaporated in the mutual respect of this single moment. "I'm sorry, Grandma," Sarah whispered. "I got so caught up in my own career, I forgot I was standing on your shoulders." Margaret patted her back, her eyes twinkling. "You weren't standing on my shoulders, honey. You were learning to fly. Now, you have your own sky." The story of that day spread like wildfire. The hashtag Sullivan Strong was trending by nightfall, filled with posts from veterans, active duty members, and civilians who had witnessed the event. The Air Force, facing a moment of public embarrassment and profound inspiration, acted swiftly. The Sullivan Initiative was launched, a new program dedicated to identifying and preserving valuable, institutional knowledge from retired veterans, ensuring that prejudice or bureaucracy would never again sideline a genius. Weeks later, a humbled Bradley Chin, having been given a second chance in a non-supervisory role, was the first to sign up for a workshop led by Martinez and a new consultant, Margaret Sullivan. He arrived early, sat in the front row, and took meticulous notes, a man genuinely ready to learn. As Margaret finally drove home in her old Honda, her satchel now filled with business cards, job offers, and the patches of a dozen different squadrons, she knew her legacy was secure. It wasn't in a museum or a history book. It was in the sky, in every A-10 that still flew. It was in the grateful eyes of the old veterans and the inspired gaze of the new generation. Margaret's story reminds us that true authority isn't found in a title or a name tag. It's written in experience, etched in results, and proven in the lives you touch. But it leaves us with a question: how many other Margarets are still out there, their wisdom and brilliance hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to see past the surface? What do you think? Is this a one-in-a-million story, or does it reveal a deeper truth about how we value people? Share your own experiences in the comments below. Let's talk about the legends you know who deserve their own flyover. Please, always comment with respect for everyone's perspective. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more true stories that matter, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's make sure no hero stays invisible.